Dr. Marcus Webb had spent 15 years working with the Boston Historical Society, but he'd never seen anything quite like this. The photograph had arrived as part of an estate donation from the old Beacon Hill neighborhood, a standard family portrait from 1903 showing what appeared to be a prosperous family gathered in their parlor for a formal sitting. The image showed 7 people arranged carefully. A stern-looking father seated in the center, his wife standing beside him with her hand on his shoulder, and 5 children of varying ages positioned around them. Everyone wore their finest clothes, faces frozen in the serious expressions typical of early photography's long exposure times. Behind them, heavy curtains framed tall windows, and ornate furniture filled the elaborate Victorian room. Marcus had been cataloging the photograph's metadata when he decided to run it through the Historical Society's new digital enhancement software, a powerful tool that could recover details lost to age, fading, and the limitations of early photographic technology. The software used artificial intelligence to analyze light, shadow, and texture, often revealing information invisible to the naked eye. He uploaded the high-resolution scan and initiated the enhancement protocol. As the software processed the image, Marcus sipped his coffee and reviewed the accompanying documentation. The photograph was labeled simply, "The Morrison Family, November 1903, Beacon Hill Residence." When the enhanced image appeared on his screen, Marcus nearly dropped his cup. In the far corner of the room, where deep shadows had created an area of impenetrable darkness in the original photograph, the enhancement revealed something impossible, something that shouldn't be there. A hand, pale, lifeless, extending from behind a heavy velvet curtain. Marcus leaned closer, his heart pounding. The enhancement software had amplified the faint light reflected in that shadowed corner, revealing what 120 years of darkness had concealed. It wasn't just a hand. As he adjusted the contrast and brightness, more details emerged. An arm, a shoulder, and finally, the unmistakable outline of a human figure slumped in the corner, partially hidden by furniture and shadow. Someone else had been in that room during the photograph, someone the family had either not noticed or deliberately concealed. And judging by the unnatural position of the body and the pallor of the visible skin, that person was dead. Marcus immediately secured the enhanced image and began researching the Morrison family. The Boston city directories from 1903 listed the head of household as Robert Morrison, age 47, occupation, textile mill owner. His wife was listed as Charlotte Morrison, age 42. Their children, Robert Jr., age 20, Margaret, age 17, Thomas, age 14, Eleanor, age 11, and William, age 8. The family had been prominent in Boston society. Robert Morrison Sr. owned 3 textile mills in the industrial district and served on several corporate boards. The Morrison residence on Beacon Hill was one of the neighborhood's grandest properties. A 4-story brownstone purchased in 1895, Marcus searched newspaper archives for any mention of deaths or disappearances associated with the Morrison family in late 1903. What he found made his blood run cold. On November 17th, 1903, just 2 days after the photograph was dated, the Boston Globe ran a brief article. Household staff member missing from Beacon Hill home. The article stated that Miss Anna Kowalski, age 23, employed as a housemaid by the Morrison family, had failed to report for work and was presumed to have left her position without notice. The family declined to comment, and no police investigation was mentioned. Marcus found Anna's name in the 1900 census, Anna Kowalski, immigrant from Poland, age 20, working as a domestic servant. By 1903, she'd been employed by the Morrison family for at least 3 years. He searched for any subsequent records of Anna Kowalski, marriage certificates, death records, census entries, anything that would indicate what happened to her after November 1903. There was nothing. Anna had simply vanished from all records immediately after being reported missing from the Morrison household. Marcus pulled up the enhanced photograph again, studying the body in the corner with growing certainty. The figure wore what appeared to be a simple dark dress, the typical uniform of a housemaid. The positioning suggested the person had collapsed or been placed there, hidden behind the heavy curtain that partially obscured the corner. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. Marcus was looking at potential evidence of a murder that had gone undetected for 120 years. Marcus contacted the Boston Police Department's Records Division, explaining that he was researching a historical case. They directed him to the Massachusetts State Archives, where pre-1920 police records had been transferred decades ago. After 2 days of searching through deteriorating ledgers and incident reports, Marcus found what he was looking for. A missing person report filed on November 18, 1903 by Mrs. Helena Kowalski, Anna's mother, who lived in the North End's Polish immigrant community. The report was brief and dismissive in tone. Mrs. Kowalski claims daughter Anna, employed at Morrison Residence Beacon Hill, has not returned home. Mr. Robert Morrison states Anna left employment of her own accord, taking her belongings. No evidence of foul play. Girl likely sought employment elsewhere or returned to Poland. Case closed. The investigating officer's name was listed as Sergeant Patrick. O'Brien, Marcus noted the casual. dismissal of a mother's concerns and the immediate acceptance of the employer's explanation, typical of how immigrant workers' complaints were handled in that era, especially when wealthy families were involved. But Marcus found something else in those archives, something that suggested this wasn't the first time the Morrison household had been associated with suspicious circumstances. In June 1902, 16 months before Anna disappeared, another police report documented the death of Mary Sullivan, age 19, also employed as a housemaid by the Morrison family. The death was ruled accidental. Girl fell down service stairs, suffered fatal head trauma. Family physician confirmed accidental nature of injuries. No investigation warranted. 2 housemaids, both young immigrant women, both dead or disappeared within 2 years while employed by the same family. Marcus knew this pattern was significant, but he needed more evidence. He returned to the enhanced photograph, examining every detail. The Morrison family members all faced the camera, their expressions controlled and formal. None of them looked toward the shadowed corner. Either they genuinely didn't know about the body during the photograph, or they were accomplished at hiding guilty knowledge. Marcus focused on the eldest son, Robert Jr., whose position in the photograph placed him closest to the hidden corner. Something about his posture seemed tense, his jaw clenched unnaturally tight. Marcus needed to find anyone who might have information about the Morrison family and their household. He posted inquiries on genealogy forums and local history websites, describing his research into prominent Beacon Hill families from the early 1900s. 3 days later, he received an email from a woman named Patricia Brennan, age 78, whose grandmother had worked as a cook in a neighboring Beacon Hill household during that period. Patricia had boxes of her grandmother's letters and journals and offered to meet Marcus at the Historical Society. Patricia arrived with a worn leather satchel containing her grandmother's papers. My grandmother, Bridget O'Connor, worked for the Cabot family from 1900 to 1910, Patricia explained. She kept detailed journals. She was very observant and wrote about all the neighborhood families. Marcus carefully opened the first journal. Bridget's handwriting was neat and precise, her observations astute. She documented the comings and goings of Beacon Hill, society with the sharp eye of someone who saw everything, but was expected to remain invisible. Marcus found entries about the Morrison family scattered throughout. 1903, most were mundane observations about parties and social calls, but one entry from November 1903 made him sit up straight. Mrs. Morrison came to our kitchen door this afternoon in great distress, asking to speak with Mrs. Cabot. She appeared shaken, nearly hysterical. I overheard her say something terrible had happened at their house, something involving young Mr. Robert and one of their maids. Mrs. Cabot took her into the parlor and closed the doors. When Mrs. Morrison left an hour later, she appeared composed, but very pale. Mrs. Cabot told me afterward that we must never speak of Mrs. Morrison's visit to anyone. The entry was dated November 15th, 1903. The exact date of the family photograph. Marcus found another entry 2 days later. The Polish girl who worked at the Morrison house has gone missing. Her mother came to our door, asking if we'd seen Anna. She was weeping, said something wasn't right. The Morrison family claims the girl left without notice, but the mother doesn't believe it. Mrs. Cabot told her there was nothing to be done. The police won't interfere with a respectable family's affairs. Armed with Bridget's journal entries, Marcus returned to the newspaper archives and expanded his search. He discovered that, in December 1903, just 1 month after Anna disappeared, Robert Morrison Jr. had suddenly left Boston. A brief society column noted, "Young Mr. Robert Morrison has departed for an extended tour of Europe to broaden his education and business prospects. The family wishes him well in his travels." Marcus traced Robert Jr.'s movements through passport records and ship manifests. He'd sailed to England in December 1903 and remained abroad for nearly 3 years, not returning to Boston until 1906. This extended absence immediately after a housemaid's disappearance seemed more like exile than education. When Robert Jr. finally returned in 1906, he settled in New York rather than Boston, working in his father's business, but maintaining distance from the family home. He married in 1908 and never returned to live in Boston. His obituary in 1952 made no mention of his Beacon Hill upbringing, focusing instead on his New York business career. Marcus needed to understand what had happened on November 15th, 1903. He examined the enhanced photograph again with fresh perspective. The family had gathered for a formal portrait, an expensive undertaking in 1903, requiring a professional photographer with heavy equipment and chemical processing supplies. Such sessions were typically planned weeks in advance to commemorate special occasions, anniversaries, graduations, or holidays. Why would a family arrange for a formal photograph on the same day something terrible happened in their home? Unless the photograph itself was part of covering up that terrible event, Marcus researched Victorian photography practices and discovered something crucial. Family portraits were considered proof of respectability and normalcy. Wealthy families displayed them prominently to demonstrate their status and moral standing. If the Morrison family was trying to conceal a crime, appearing in a formal portrait would project an image of normalcy and innocence. but they couldn't completely hide the evidence. Anna's body was in that corner, and the photographer's equipment captured it, though the limitations of 1903 technology buried the evidence in shadow for over a century. Marcus needed to find the photographer's records to confirm his theory. Marcus searched through business directories from 1903 and found 3 professional photographers operating in Beacon Hill during that period. Cross-referencing with the photograph's technical characteristics, paper type, chemical processing methods, mounting style, he identified the likely photographer, Harold Fitzpatrick, whose studio was located on Charles Street. The Boston Athenaeum Library held a collection of business records from defunct Boston establishments, including Fitzpatrick's photography studio. Marcus requested access to the collection and found himself examining ledgers and correspondence dating back to 1895. In the studio's appointment book for November 1903, he found the entry, Morrison family, Beacon Hill residence, November 15th, 2:00 p.m., full family portrait. Parlor setting. The fee listed was substantial, $5, equivalent to a week's wages for a working person. More interesting were the notes attached to the account. Payment received November 20th. Client requested all photographic plates and negatives be destroyed after prints delivered. Unusual request, but complied with client wishes. Additional fee charged. The request to destroy the negatives was highly unusual and expensive. Photographers typically kept negatives for years, offering clients the option to order additional prints. The Morrison family had paid extra to ensure no copies of that photograph could ever be made beyond the prints they received. But Marcus found something else in those records. Harold Fitzpatrick's personal diary, kept separately from his business ledgers. The photographer had been an amateur writer who documented interesting aspects of his work. His entry for November 15th, 1903, revealed the truth. Attended the Morrison residence this afternoon for a family portrait sitting. The atmosphere in the house was extraordinarily tense. Mrs. Morrison appeared to have been weeping, and the eldest son looked positively ill. They insisted on proceeding with the portrait, despite my suggestion to reschedule. During the setup, I noticed the parlor's corner was unusually dark. The heavy curtains had been drawn across that section, which created poor lighting balance. When I suggested moving them, Mr. Morrison became quite agitated and insisted I work with the existing light. The family positioned themselves in such a way that they blocked clear sight lines to that corner. Most peculiar session I've ever conducted. Marcus realized he needed to find Anna Kowalski's actual remains to prove she'd been murdered. But where would the Morrison family have disposed of her body after the photograph was taken? He returned to city records, looking for any construction, renovation, or property changes at the Morrison residence in late 1903 or early 1904. What he found was revealing. In March 1904, 4 months after Anna disappeared, the Morrison family had undertaken extensive renovations to their basement and foundation, hiring contractors to repair water, damage and reinforce structural supports. Such work would require excavation and provide the perfect opportunity to bury a body. Marcus contacted the current owners of the former Morrison property. The building had been converted to luxury condominiums in the 1990s. During that renovation, had anything unusual been discovered? The property manager put him in touch with the construction firm that had handled the 1990s renovation. After several phone calls, Marcus connected with a retired foreman named Donald Price, who remembered the project. "Oh yeah, the old Morrison place," Donald said when Marcus reached him by phone. "Beautiful building, but that basement was strange. When we were excavating for the new foundation work, we found some old brickwork that didn't match the original construction, like someone had patched a section of the floor sometime way back. We broke through it and found what looked like human bones." Marcus's heart raced. "What happened to them?" "We called the police, like you're supposed to. They sent someone out, but the detective said the bones were so old they were clearly historical, probably from before the house was built, maybe from when that area was farmland. He said there was no crime to investigate, and the medical examiner's office didn't want to deal with century-old remains. We were told to rebury them respectfully during our new foundation work, which we did." Marcus thanked Donald and immediately contacted the Boston Police Department's cold case unit. After explaining his research and the enhanced photograph evidence, a detective agreed to meet with him. Detective Sarah Chen listened intently as Marcus presented his findings. The enhanced photograph, the missing housemaid, the suspicious timeline, and the bones discovered during renovation. Detective Chen recognized the significance of Marcus's research. While the case was over a century old and all potential suspects long dead, the possibility of proving a historical murder and identifying unknown remains was compelling. She petitioned the district attorney's office for permission to exhume the remains from beneath the former Morrison property. The legal process took 3 months, but eventually a court order was granted. In July, a forensic team carefully excavated the basement floor of the condominium building. What they found confirmed Marcus's theory. A complete human skeleton, clearly buried intentionally, wrapped in deteriorated fabric that analysis suggested was household linen from the early 1900s. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Lisa Morrison examined the remains. Female, approximately 20 to 25 years old, about 5 feet 4 inches tall. The skull shows evidence of severe blunt force trauma, multiple fractures consistent with being struck repeatedly or falling from significant height. These injuries would have been fatal. DNA analysis couldn't definitively identify the remains without living relatives for comparison, but the physical description matched Anna Kowalski's records. The forensic team also found something else with the remains: fragments of a housemaid's uniform, buttons, and a small metal pendant with the initial A engraved on it. Marcus contacted organizations serving Boston's Polish community and eventually found a distant cousin of Anna's who agreed to provide DNA for comparison. 6 weeks later, the results came back. The remains were confirmed to be Anna Kowalski, missing since November 1903. The medical examiner's final report stated, cause of death, homicide by blunt force trauma. Manner of death, consistent with assault or deliberate harm. Based on evidence of concealment and burial, this was not an accident. Marcus returned to his research with a renewed purpose. He needed to understand exactly what had happened on November 15, 1903. He examined Bridget O'Connor's journal again and found an entry he'd previously overlooked, dated November 14, 1903, the day before the photograph. There's been talk among the household staff about young Mr. Robert Morrison's inappropriate attention toward the Polish maid Anna. Mrs. Morrison apparently spoke to her son about it, and there was a terrible argument. The girl is said to be frightened and wants to leave her position. With all the evidence assembled, Marcus worked with Detective Chen and a criminal psychologist to reconstruct what likely happened on November 15, 1903. Anna Kowalski, facing unwanted advances from Robert Morrison Jr., had decided to leave her position. In the early morning of November 15th, she likely confronted Robert or his parents about his behavior, threatening to report him to authorities, or at minimum, to damage the family's reputation by speaking publicly about his misconduct. In 1903, such an accusation from a housemaid against a wealthy family's son would have been explosive, even if not legally pursued. The scandal could ruin the family's social standing. Young women who worked in domestic service had little power, but their ability to speak publicly about their employer's private conduct was a threat that wealthy families took seriously. The confrontation must have escalated. Robert Jr., either in rage or panic, likely struck Anna, perhaps pushing her down the service stairs, as had accidentally happened to Mary Sullivan the previous year. The force of the impact caused fatal head trauma. Faced with their son's crime, the Morrison family made a choice: protect him at any cost. They concealed Anna's body in the parlor, behind the heavy curtain in the shadowed corner, while they decided what to do. Someone, likely Robert Morrison Sr., had the calculated presence of mind to realize that proceeding with their scheduled family photograph would provide an alibi of normalcy. Who would pose for a formal portrait with a body in the room unless they had nothing to hide? The photographer came and went, never seeing what lurked in the shadows. After he departed, the family moved Anna's body to the basement and began planning its disposal. Within days, Robert Jr. was sent abroad, ostensibly for education, actually for exile until the scandal passed. 4 months later, during renovation work, Anna was buried beneath the basement floor. The police, when confronted with a poor immigrant mother's concerns about her missing daughter, accepted the wealthy family's explanation without investigation. Anna's murder went undetected, her family denied justice, and the Morrison family maintained their social position, but they couldn't erase every trace. The photograph, the very tool meant to prove their innocence, had inadvertently captured evidence of their guilt, preserved in shadow for 120 years. 6 months after the exhumation, the Boston Historical Society held a special exhibition titled Hidden in Plain Sight: The Anna Kowalski Case and Victorian-Era Injustice. Marcus served as curator, presenting the enhanced photograph, the forensic evidence, and the complete historical record he'd assembled. The exhibition drew significant attention from both historians and the general public. The enhanced photograph was displayed alongside the original, demonstrating how modern technology could reveal long-buried secrets. Visitors could see the progression of the investigation, from the first digital enhancement to the final forensic confirmation. But the exhibition's centerpiece was dedicated to Anna Kowalski herself. Marcus had worked with Boston's Polish Cultural Center to research Anna's life before her death. They found records showing she'd immigrated to America in 1897 at age 17, following her father's death in Poland. She'd worked hard, sent money home to her mother and younger siblings, and dreamed of eventually opening her own dressmaking shop. Photographs of Anna were discovered in her family's possession. A young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, her whole life ahead of her before it was violently stolen by a wealthy young man who faced no consequences. The Massachusetts Attorney General's office issued a formal declaration. Though the perpetrators of this crime are long deceased and beyond earthly justice, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts acknowledges that Anna Kowalski was murdered, that her death was deliberately concealed, and that she was denied justice due to the prejudices and inequalities of her time. We honor her memory and recognize the grave injustice done to her and her family. Anna's remains were finally given a proper burial in a Catholic cemetery in Boston's Polish neighborhood. Her gravestone, funded by public donation, read, Anna Kowalski, 1880-1903, beloved daughter and sister. Murdered in service, forgotten by justice, remembered by truth. The Boston Police Department formally apologized for the original investigation's failures, acknowledging how immigrant workers' lives were devalued and their families' concerns dismissed when wealthy families were involved. Marcus stood at the exhibition's opening, watching visitors examine the photograph, some gasping when they saw the enhanced version reveal the hidden body, others standing silently before Anna's portrait, acknowledging a life cut short and a century of erasure finally corrected. The Morrison family's descendants, located through genealogical research, issued a statement acknowledging their ancestors' crime and apologizing to Anna's surviving family members. They established a scholarship fund in Anna's name for young immigrant women pursuing education. As Marcus gave his curator's talk to the assembled crowd, he reflected on how a single photograph could hide and reveal truth simultaneously. The Morrison family had tried to use that image to prove their innocence, to show themselves as respectable and normal, while a young woman's body lay hidden just feet away. But photography, like truth itself, has a way of persisting, waiting for the right moment, the right technology, and the right person to look closely enough to see what was always there. Anna Kowalski's story had been buried for 120 years, her death unacknowledged, her life unremembered. But through the accident of light and shadow captured in a photograph, through the persistence of the historical record, and through the work of those committed to uncovering the truth, she was finally seen. Her murder was finally proven, and her memory would finally be honored. The photograph that was meant to conceal a crime had instead preserved the evidence needed to reveal it, proof that even in the deepest shadows, the truth can never be completely hidden, only waiting to be brought into the light.